So I'd like to begin today by, as usual, offering my greetings. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, good evening, good whatever time of day it is for you. We will begin as usual by reciting the prayers for going for refuge and bodhicitta. So I'd like to ask you all to please recite these prayers with faith and devotion. So one moment, please. O Sanje Chodan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Bardo Dane Chapsum Chi Dagi Chenyen Gi Pesenam Gi Dola Penjer Sanje Drobar Sho Sanje Chodan Sogi Chonam La Chancho bardo dane chapsum je dage chenyen gi besenam gi rola penjer sanje robar sho sanje chedan soge chonam la Chancho bardo dane chapsum che dage chenyen gi besanam gi drola penjer sanje drobar sho until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Until enlightenment I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and the sublime Sangha. By the merit of my listening to the Dharma, may I reach Buddhahood to benefit beings. Semjen Thamje Dewa Dan Dewe Judan Dambara Jurje Donga Mebe Dewa Donga Dan Donga Ji Jutan Rawar Jurje Donga Mebe Dewa Tamba Tam and Rawa Jurje Yeren Shada Nitan Rawa Danyon Chambola Nebra Jurje. May all sentient beings be happy and have the causes of happiness. May they be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be parted from the highest joy, which is free of suffering. May they dwell in the great equanimity, free of attachment or hatred for those near or far. In the Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times, who shows me directly my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious exalted Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Please bless us that the Dharma become the path. Please bless us that the path dispel confusion, and please bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. And so now, please take a moment to consider your motivation. As Khenchen Trungpa Rinpoche always says, of course we have a good motivation when we plan to come to a Dharma teaching. We can take that as a given that the causal motivation is good, but the contemporaneous motivation, to use the Abhidharma language, can change. The motivation that you have at the time it can vary because of varying conditions. Something might happen between the cause that would distract you or make you upset or something like that. And so it's always important to think about your motivation, and the best motivation is to have the motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to bring all sentient beings throughout space with whom we've all had intimate connections over many lifetimes. May we bring them all to the state of complete and lasting happiness, the state of perfect Buddhahood. Or if you are unable to really generate that, to have the wish to bring yourself the lasting happiness of freedom from samsara, the liberation. Or if even that, to at least do something good for yourself, to have a good motivation for yourself in this lifetime and in future lifetimes. This is also a good motivation. So examine yourself and look at your motivation. And that's how Rinpoche usually phrases it. I also think it's a good idea to look at yourself, see where you are, and then think about where you really want to be, and maybe push yourself, think of yourself a little bit. And if you look at yourself and say, well, really my motivation is just for this life, then you can make the aspiration, well, may my motivation become the true motivation of bodhicitta. And if you do that, then eventually you will be able to actually develop the motivation of bodhicitta. In any case, please listen to the Dharma this morning with a good motivation. And the Dharma that we are listening to is the Treasury of Abhidharma by Vasubandhu, as described by, or as explained by the 9th Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his treatise Youthful Play. The treatise, the Treasury of Abhidharma has 8 chapters, or areas as they are called, and we are discussing the 8th area, the teachings on absorption. Within this 8th area, there are there's the actual text of the 8th area, and then there's the conclusion of the treatise. And the actual text of the 8th area has 3 main parts: the explanation of the dhyanas and formless, the classifications of samadhi, and the explanations of quality supported by samadhi. So we have already been through the first 2. And now we are speaking about the quality supported by the samadhi. And so the quality has, the explanation of the quality supported by samadhi has the 2 topics, teaching the immeasurables and teaching the other qualities. And we spoke about the 4 immeasurables yesterday and their importance. So that brings us today to the section on the other qualities, teaching the other qualities of the samadhis, which is on page 571 of the book Jewels from the Treasury. But before we begin, we did have one question that came in over email. Unless you sent it in the last 5 minutes and I haven't seen it. I'm not going to look now. If you have, I'll try to get to it tomorrow. At any rate, the question reads, it may have been mentioned in the text, but I can't remember where. Among the 3 levels of the 8 dhyanas and in the formless, that is, there are the 8 levels, and there are 3 types of each. There's the pure, afflicted, and defiled. So why can't the peak support undefiled samadhi? What is the reason for that? So we did go through this very, very briefly on one day, but it is not explained all that clearly in this text. It does mention that the peak is unable to support the undefiled because, for one thing, the peak is the highest level of existence, and so it can't really function as its own antidote. Of course, all of the pure samadhis of the form and formless realm don't function as their own antidote. But on the peak, it's also, they can't become the undefiled. For one thing, they can't function as their antidote. The other factor that is listed in the Chimabhidharma is that because in the peak you have neither conception nor non-conception, and so it's somewhere in the middle. So there's conception, but it's weak. And because the conception, which is by its nature discernment, is weak, then it's unable to support the noble paths or the undefiled paths. So this is another reason given for why the peak of existence can't support the undefiled samadhis. So that is the question that we had, and so we will now go to the text. So today, in talking about the other qualities of the samadhis, just want to make sure. Yes, here we are, teaching the other qualities of the samadhis. In the book, it's on page 571. There are 4 topics. The essence of the qualities attained. The second is how they are attained. Then the third part is the distinctions of support. And the fourth is how samadhi arises. There's a little formatting error in this ebook here. That fourth one is not a separate heading. It should actually just be part of the previous paragraph. So the essence of the qualities attained. So what are the qualities what are additional qualities you can gain through the form and formless meditations, in other words? So what qualities do you develop? Well, we discussed about developing the 4 immeasurables yesterday, but there are other qualities, and these are called the 8 emancipations, the overpowering sense bases, and the all-encompassing sense bases. So the essence of the qualities attained has these 3 topics. So we'll first speak about the emancipations. This has 3 topics again: the classifications of the emancipations, their individual natures, and the spheres, the first 7. So of 8 emancipations, so there are 8 emancipations that are taught in the sutras. And they are called emancipations because, as it says in the commentary, as they are directed away from their focus, they are emancipations. So what they are is you have already abandoned something, but you're directed away from it. You're turning away from what you've already abandoned. So this, therefore, getting more control over your liberation. That's essentially what we're saying. You've achieved the separation, you've achieved the detachment, but you're kind of distancing yourself more through these, and turning away from them with these 8 emancipations. It's kind of like you're testing yourself. How liberated am I really? So you check with the emancipations. So the emancipations are, according to the sutras, viewing external form while conceiving of internal form. The second is viewing external form while conceiving of no internal form. The third is the emancipation of loveliness. And then there are the 4 formless, each of which is considered an emancipation. And finally, there's the emancipation of cessation. So these are the 8. You've got the viewing external form while conceiving of inner form. What this means is that you are on the first level of dhyana, and you are doing repulsiveness meditation for the external forms of the desire realm, at the same time as you conceive of yourself as having an internal form. And the second one, maybe I should go back so you can actually see that. So that's the first one, viewing external form while conceiving of external form. That is the first. Maybe I should resize this so we can look at all of them at once. Whoops. There we are. Then the second is here. It's the viewing external form while conceiving of no internal form. And so this is where you're on the second dhyana. And you are again viewing doing repulsiveness meditation. But at this point on the second dhyana, you aren't conceiving of having an internal form of your own. So these are both repulsiveness meditation. Then the emancipation of loveliness is when you're on the 4th dhyana, and you want to check, are you really, really totally free of any attachment to those forms? And so you imagine something beautiful, the emancipation of loveliness. So you visualize something lovely to see how are you really not attached. And then there are the 4 formless, each of which is like an emancipation from the previous level. And then the emancipation of cessation. So what are their individual natures? This has 4 topics: the emancipation, or the explanation of the first 2 emancipations, the explanation of the third, and the explanation of the formless emancipations, and the emancipation of cessation. So again, there is a formatting error in the ebook right here. So the explanation of the first 2 emancipations has 2 points. The first 2 are repulsive. So they're meditations on repulsiveness. Because the first 2, the emancipations, have the aspects of bluishness and so forth. They have the nature of meditation on the repulsive. This is when we were speaking about the repulsiveness meditation earlier, and you imagine corpses or your own body becoming like a corpse and turning blue and red and rotting and going all the way down to just being no more than bones. So that's the meditation on the repulsive. So these two are on two dhyanas, the two dhyanas. Which dhyanas do we mean? We mean the first two. So these two emancipations are antidotes for the desire for color. So they are on the first two dhyanas. So the first dhyana is the first emancipation is on the first dhyana, and it's an antidote for the color of the desire realm. The second emancipation is on the second level of dhyana, and it's also an emancipation, but for the colors of first level of form. But they're absent from the third or higher because above that, there's no desire for color. Actually, what we're saying is that on the second dhyana and above, because there is no eye consciousness that functions on the second dhyana, when you're on the second dhyana and you use your eye consciousness, you actually use the eye consciousness of the first dhyana. So on the second, third, and fourth dhyana, on those levels of meditation, there's no desire for color or for any other aspect of form. So when you're on the third dhyana, you wouldn't look back at the second dhyana and say, oh, I don't want to see, am I attached to the colors of the second dhyana? You can't do that because there are no colors of the second dhyana to be attached to. And the reason why there's no color is because there's no eye consciousness above the second dhyana. So on the second dhyana and above, there is no eye consciousness. The third, on the last, the third emancipation, the emancipation of the lovely, is non-greed. By its nature, the third meditation is a meditation on non-greed. Are you attached to these beautiful things, beautiful people, beautiful whatever, beautiful chocolate oblivion truffle torts, if you want to go back to those? Of course, you're in the form realm, so you have absolutely no desire for food. So it's probably not the chocolate oblivion truffle tort, but for forms, check. Do you have attachment to them or not? So the third, the emancipation of the lovely, is on the last level of the dhyanas, the fourth. As its essence is the antidote for greed. By its nature, it's checking: do you have attachment, which is a kind of a subtle form of greed? It is primarily non-greed. But since it has the lovely as its aspect, it is not repulsiveness meditation. In other words, it's easy to see that you have no attachment to things that you find disgusting. But if you want to check if you really have no attachment, you need to meditate on something that you find attractive or might find attractive. That's why we meditate on the lovely. So thus one emanates an attractive form and views it as lovely. As that itself is manifested by the body of samadhi, it is so called. It's said to be manifested by the body of samadhi. So including their associations, the first three are the five aggregates by nature, which means that they're all of the different mental factors that are associated with the samadhi, plus the imperceptible forms of the vows of dhyana and the undefined vows. So the need for the emancipation of the lovely is that by meditating on the repulsive, your mind is depressed. So you need to uplift it with intense joy. This is actually a common thing that we see in many meditation. Like when we talk about in our Tibetan tradition of meditating on the four thoughts that turn the mind, when you meditate on impermanence too long, you get depressed. And so then you meditate on the precious human body in order to perk yourself up a little bit. So similarly here, when you get yourself depressed thinking about corpses and repulsiveness, then you uplift it with the intense joy of the emancipation of the lovely. Now, this is an interesting point because there is actually no joy on the fourth jhana where you are meditating upon this. So this is a point that needs to be a little bit, but it's basically saying lifting yourself up. The other reason is also if attachment to a lovely emanation arises, the first two emancipations have not been completed. But if it does not arise, they have. So this is in order to examine that. Have you really done your meditations well? So this is like you're checking yourself and to see, have you actually done them well? So the emancipation of the lovely is not taught on the first three dhyanas because there's joy on those levels. So since there is joy on the first three levels, if you meditate on the What's going to happen if you pay to something attractive and beautiful there, as it says? So if one pays attention to the lovely and has joy and craving for that object, non-greed will not be accomplished. So because you still have the feelings of joy and pleasure on the first three jhanas, then it's difficult to actually do it there. You need to be on a level where you don't have joy or pleasure. Alternatively, it is not taught there because there are jhanas that have faults. So non-greed is not accomplished there. We spoke about the 8 faults of samadhi at the end of the last chapter. So next are the 4 emancipations of the formless, the explanation of the formless emancipations, and this reads, virtuous formless equipoise. So it's basically just your equipoise on the formless level. So only the 4 virtuous, that is pure or undefiled formless equipoises, are emancipations. So the afflicted formless equipoise, and the states of beings not in equipoise, such as the state of death, are not. Even in the form realm, you have these, what we would say are post-meditation states where you're not in equipoise, such as the moment of death. So those are not the emancipations, but anytime you're in the formless equipoises, you are in emancipation. Why they're called the reason why they're called emancipations is that you are emancipated from the attachment of the previous. You're turning away from the attachments of the lower levels. So each of them, like the first level of formless, the infinite consciousness is what do we say? It's checking to whether it's liberation from the 4th jhana and so forth up to the peak of existence. So on the preparations, the paths of liberation are emancipation, but the paths of no obstacles are not, because they focus on a lower level. So it's saying when you're doing the 8 preparations for the level, when you have reached the path of liberation, that is emancipation. Obviously, it's called liberation. This is called emancipation. Actually, the Tibetan word is the same, but I just thought we have other meditations called liberation, so I thought in English we could use a different word, emancipation. In any case, the emancipations are the paths of liberation are emancipation, but the paths of no obstacles are not, because they're focusing on the lower level. In other words, they're not turning away from the lower level. They're looking at it. So when you're turning away is when you are liberated. Okay, so the emancipation of cessation. This is the 8th of the emancipations, and the discussion of it, the explanation of it, has 3 points. The first is identifying its essence. It is the absorption of cessation. So the 8th emancipation is the absorption of cessation of conception and feeling. This was explained in the 2nd area. In specific, it is explained in the 43rd stanza of the 2nd area, which describes how it arises from training, how it's produced by noble beings, and so forth. And it's entered from the level of the peak of existence, after the most subtle of subtle minds. So why are these called emancipations, you ask? It is because the first 2 are directed away from greed. You're turning away, or you're moving away from greed. The 3rd is moving away from being discouraged and attached. That's the emancipation of the lovely. The 4 formless are from the conception of form and also the conceptions of the lower levels of formless. And cessation is directed away from conceptions or in feelings, or alternatively, all formations. That is the mental factors of the formations. So this absorptionist century, what is the mind of entry? In other words, what mind do you have to be in to enter the absorptionist cessation? That follows the subtlest of the subtle. So how do you get in it? We have to be in the subtlest of subtle minds, the conception of the peak of existence. So regarding entering the absorptionist cessation, so how do you enter it? The conception of the peak of existence is the subtlest in the 3 realms. It's the subtlest level of conception, but focusing on cessation is by far the subtlest of all. So that one enters that absorption of cessation immediately following that subtlest of subtle minds, immediately following the peak of existence. The mind of arising. So when you are finished with your little stay, your sojourn, taking a rest in the absorption of cessation, and when you arise from it, what mind can you come out of it? Do you just go straight from cessation into the desire realm, or into the form or formless? What do you come into? One rises from it through one's own levels pure, or the noble of the lower. So when you arise from that, one rises from that cessation as one has resolved to do. In other words, before you go and you say, I'm going to snap out of this in 7 days. I'm going to snap out of this in a year, whatever you say. Then through one's own level, you arise through one's own level, that is the peaks, pure, pure, that is the virtuous defiled, again, not undefiled as we discussed at the beginning of the class, or through the noble undefiled mind of the lower sense base of nothingness. This is similar to how when you're on the level of the peak, if you want to do an undefiled meditation, then you use the meditation of the level of nothingness. And here, by the way, when we're talking about these as sense bases, this is not explained here. It's explained in the second chapter briefly. The absorptions of the formless and many of the other absorptions are called sense bases. It's because they're like supports for samadhi. And particularly in the formless, you don't have a sensory organ, a faculty as the basis for it, or an external object. So the basis for the samadhi is this type of absorption. So it functions in a similar way as the faculty, as the sensory faculties in terms of supporting the arising and the production of the mind. And so in that way, the absorptions are called sense bases by the same word, ayatana in Sanskrit and kyeche in Tibetan. In this way, the absorption of cessation and the mind that enters it are on the level of the peak. So they're on that level, the peak of existence, so they're defiled only. The mind of arising can be either defiled or undefiled. If you're arising onto the level of peak, it's defiled. If you arise onto the noble of the level of nothingness, then it is undefiled. So that one mind, the mind of cessation, has no focus. So therefore, we need to wonder, well, what are the focuses of the first 7? And so as it says here, what are the spheres? The spheres, focus, objects are similar in meaning. So this has 2 points. The sphere of the first 3. Sights of desire are the first object. So the first emancipation, the emancipation of viewing external form while conceiving of internal form, has as its object the sights of the sense-based form of desire are the object of the first 2 of the 8 as emancipations. So it's the first one, viewing external form while meditating, while conceiving of internal form. The external form is the forms of desire. And the second, it is for the external form. It is also for the external forms of the desire realm. And the third has an attractive object. So these are also forms of the desire realm, attractive forms of the desire realm. Well, then you ask, are these not emanations on the basis of samadhi, you ask? Because you're emanating these forms. Well, of course they are, but they're emanations contained within desire. So the emanations can be on a different level than the emanating mind. In other words, the emanations, it's like visualizing them. And so in a sense, it's like that emanations, they're emanations contained in desire. The sphere of the formless, so there are the 4 formless emancipations, and the formless sphere is suffering in such of their own and higher levels, compatible with subsequent knowing. The sphere of the 4 emancipations of formless is the suffering in such, that is, including the origin and all the paths of their own and higher levels, that is compatible with subsequent knowing. In other words, it's subsequent knowing because it's on higher levels. Because the subsequent knowing knows the higher realms. It is possible that the formless emancipations can be the samadhi of no attributes of no attributes. So they can also be the non-analytic cessation. The cessation of no attributes of no attributes is when you first do the samadhi of no attributes and you're meditating on the 4 aspects of the truth of cessation, then you, when you rise from that, then you continue to focus that, and that is the samadhi of no attributes, as we discussed the other day. And that is viewing the aspect of peace. But since there's no analysis anymore, it is non-analytic cessation. You're no longer analyzing, and the conditions for that to arise again aren't going to happen. So it is therefore non-analytic cessation. So non-composite space is also the object of the sense space of infinite consciousness. So why is there no emancipation presented on the third dhyana, you ask? Well, because the third dhyana has no desire for the colors of the level of the second dhyana, and because it is produced by the absorption of pleasure, it is not presented. It's not considered an emancipation, because it doesn't have anything that it can really emancipate you from right there. So, well, then if on the third dhyana there's also no desire for color, why is the emancipation produced on the of the lovely produced on the fourth dhyana, you ask? Well, the fourth is when you were discouraged by repulsiveness. So in order to make oneself intensely joyous, or to analyze whether the repulsive anticipations have been accomplished. So either to perk yourself up or to check, have you actually finished these? So if when paying attention to the lovely, afflictions do not arise, those two have been accomplished. So here it is talking about the purpose of the emancipation of the lovely. You're checking, have you really actually done what you needed to do, accomplish the purpose of the first two meditations, which is freeing you from desire for the desire realm. So now we've come to the second set of these qualities, the overpowering sense bases. So the overpowering sense bases, in the first you've got the emancipations, which direct you away from from what you would be attached to, the sights and so forth of desire. And then the overpowering, not only do you turn away from that, you completely overpower them. Or as Ian Concord translates it as subjugate, so you just overcome them entirely. So this has two topics, the classifications and the explanations of their characteristics. The 8 overpowering sense bases. So according to the sutras, while conceiving of internal forms, viewing small external forms with good and bad colors, and viewing large external forms with good and bad colors are the first 2 overpowering sense bases. So we've got 2. In both of them, you're conceiving of having an internal form. Then in the first of them, you're visualizing small external forms. And in general, this means sentient beings, because sentient beings, in comparison to the size of the world, even an elephant is small. So sentient beings. And then the large, this refers to the world itself. Which is quite large. And then you're looking at the colors to see, well, basically, do you have attachment to the colors of these things or not? So then while conceiving that there is no internal form, viewing the same 2 as are the third and fourth. So viewing the large or the small external forms of sentient beings, or the large external forms of the world. So then those are the third and fourth. These are pretty similar to the first 2 of the emancipations, as will be noted in a moment. So while conceiving that there is the fifth is, while conceiving that there is no internal form, viewing external forms that are blue, yellow, red, and white are the last 4. So you're looking at things that are blue in color, then at things that are yellow, red, and white, and these are taught in these sutras. So when these have overpowered all those forms, the conception that arises is the first through the sort of conception that arises is the first through the 8 overpowering sense bases. And somehow when I read this sentence earlier today and yesterday, it made sense, and now it's not. So, and basically these are they're producing, okay, when all of these, yeah, now I understand. So all of the 8 have overpowered this form. The sort of conception that arises the first through the 8th overpowering sense bases. So as you overcome them, they are the overcome the conceptions of forms. That becomes the overpowering sense bases. So conceiving of internal form and that there is no internal form is the conception of form of the viewer himself being destroyed, him or herself being destroyed or not. Small and large are forms of sentient beings in the world, as I mentioned before. And so then when you're viewing the colors, you're viewing, are they attractive or not? Are they good colors or bad colors? And overpowering them is gaining mastery. And so then knowing and seeing are explained as the paths of no liberation, no obstacles and liberation, or tranquility and insight, according to Master Arya. So here, Wangchuk Dorje is actually explaining the words of a sutra that is quoted in other commentaries. He doesn't quote the sutra, but he explains the words. So the sutra says basically that you are conceiving of internal that there is no internal form, and then viewing the small forms and so forth, and then conceiving of no internal form as the large forms and so forth. So these are quotations from the sutras. Then the good and bad colors, this is when the Buddha taught that when you look at the blue, yellow, red, and white, you look, are they good, are they bad, and so forth. So overpowering them is gaining mastery. So that is what the meaning of it. You're gaining mastery over your meditation. You're no longer just merely turning away from them, you're regaining mastery over them. And then the sutra says that you know them and you see them. And so this refers to the path of no obstacles and the paths of liberation, or to tranquility and insight, according to Master Arya, which means asanga. So in the sutra, for the 4 colors, there are 4 phrases used for the words blue and so forth that are repeated twice each, once for the example and once for the meaning. So the first mention is an overview, and the second, the natural, or is talking about the nature. The third is the fabricated, and the fourth of the Dhammas common to both. And so here, actually in the book, there is a footnote that explains these 4. So just give me a moment, and I will show you the footnote. Okay. One moment, just making the text a little bit larger so it's easier for you to see. So here we are, and we're at the bottom of the page. It says 341, note 341. Yashomitra quotes the passage from the sutras as follows. While conceiving that there is no internal form, in other words, when you're not thinking of yourself as having a form, view a blue external form, blue-colored. So this is the form that is blue-colored, then you're seeing it as blue, it radiates blue. For example, a flax flower, this is like a natural example of the color, or an excellent fabric from the land of Varanasi that is blue. So it is blue in color, blue-colored, that is seen as blue, and that radiates blue, other direction. And these forms, know that these forms have been overpowered and see that they have been overpowered. That sort of conception is the 5th overpowering sense base. So that is the quote from the sutra. So here, when in the main text, when Wangchuk Dorje is speaking about the 4 examples from the sutra, this is what he is referring to, this sutra. Now to return. Okay, so now we're going to move on. I am going through these examples relatively quickly. There is more that could be said, but it seems better at this point, to move on to move through these fairly quickly. It's the explanation of their characteristics. This has 3 points. So the first is the explanation of the 2 overpowering sense bases of that with form viewing form. The 2 are like the first emancipation. So the first 2 are what? There is the overpowering sense base of viewing small external forms while conceiving of an internal form. That's the first, and viewing large external forms while conceiving of an internal form. That's the internal form. That's the second. So these 2 of those, that of the 8. The first 2 overpowering sense bases are like the first emancipation in the particulars of their nature, level, and aspect. So it is as we described before. Basically, on the first level of dhyana, they are their repulsiveness meditation by nature, and their aspects are those of bluishness and so forth. Basically, the aspects of a decomposing body. So then the next is the explanation of the 2 overpowering sense bases of that without form viewing form. In other words, these are the 3rd and 4th overpowering sense bases of viewing the small and the large external forms while conceiving of no internal form. And so these 2 are like the second of the emancipations. So 2 of the overpowering sense bases, the 3rd and 4th, are views like the second emancipation. In other words, they are also meditations on repulsiveness. They are on the second dhyana, and they view the forms of desire. It's the explanation of the four overpowering sense bases of color. Others are like the emancipation of the lovely. So in other words, you're imagining beautiful colors in order to see, are you attached to them at all? So the others, the four emancipations of color, the blue, yellow, red, and white, are like the emancipation of the lovely. They're on the level of the fourth jhana. They focus on attractive forms of the form realm. They're non-greed by nature, and they are the five aggregates that should be understood. So basically in these four, what it seems from the text is you're looking at a blue object, and then that blue, the blueness just becomes like, through your meditation, you're visualizing that blueness, and it's just like everything just turns into blue, or everything turns into yellow, and so forth for each of the colors. And so that you're seeing and knowing that, and checking, am I attached or not? So that's the second of these sets of samadhis. And the third are the all-encompassing sense bases. So this is a type of meditation that is actually mentioned a little bit more frequently in the Tibetan texts. For example, well, actually, this is not a Tibetan text, but it's one that you're going to come across a little bit more often than the other two. Or actually, the other two are mentioned in the sutras. They're mentioned many times in the Prajnaparamita sutras, but these sense bases are talked about in the songs of Milarepa. Like when people go to a cave and Milarepa is in the cave, but all they see is fire, all they see is water. They come back later, and it turns out he was meditating upon the all-encompassing sense base of fire, or the all-encompassing sense base of water. And so that is one use that comes up in the Tibetan. Also, as some of you, many of you probably know, Kenshin Trungpa Rinpoche has been giving the transmissions of the Indian texts of Mahamudra. And last night, he read a text that mentioned these. Last night. For us, it was last night. It was really this morning for many of you, I think. But at any rate, in the last session, Rinpoche read a text that mentioned these all-encompassing sense bases. So this is a term that you will see. So this has two topics, classifications and their individual natures. And so the classifications are 10 all-encompassing sense bases. So there are 10 of these all-encompassing sense bases. So the sutras teach of the 10 all-encompassing sense bases, which have the meaning of making the visualized aspect pervade the focus uninterruptedly. So you're visualizing the focus, which would be like with Milarepa, of a water, and then you visualize that fire so intensely that it kind of everything becomes water, and it's just like uninterrupted water, and so forth. So to classify them, they're the 10 of the all-encompassing sense base of earth, the all-encompassing sense base of water, and of fire, air. So these are the four elements: blue, yellow, red, white, space, and consciousness. So these are the 10 all-encompassing sense bases. Basically, it's the same for each of them. You're visualizing until it's like completely everything becoming that. Everything in your focus, everything you're in the sphere that you're meditating on becoming that element. And their individual natures have 2 points, explaining the first 8. So the first 8 are the four elements and the 4 colors. The 8 are non-greed on the last jhana, on the 4th jhana. Their sphere is desire, so they're focusing on emanated forms of desire. So of these, the first 8 are in essence the virtue of non-greed. So they're virtuous in essence, and in particular, they're non-greed or non-attachment. They are on the level of the last or 4th jhana. Their sphere is the sense base of form of the realm of desire, similar to how the 4 sources are known as in color and shape in the world. As is mentioned in the first chapter when talking about the nature of the 4 sources or elements. Sources is another, well, in Sanskrit and Tibetan, it is definitely definitely a syllable for a synonym. Definitely a synonym for elements, but in English, it's used slightly differently. When I was doing this as being overly literally, the 4 elements. So the four elements of earth, water, fire, and air. In the world, you know, in Sanskrit or in Indian society, when you talk about earth, you talk about earth as being a yellow square, water as being a blue circle, fire as being like a red triangle, and air as being like a green hemisphere. So according to some, since it says the atmosphere is the element itself, so like the atmosphere, this is it's line from the first chapter. The object of the all-encompassing sense space of wind is touch. So the atmosphere. This just really means like all of the air around you. It's a sense space of touch, they say. So two are pure formless. And so then the last two are the formless meditations. It is explained in the levels, that is the text of the Bodhisattva levels by Asanga, that the other sense bases are not set forth as all-encompassing. So sound is not included. Why? Because sound is discontinuous. And since the five faculties do not pervade the world, and so the other sense bases include the five faculties, they're only in your body, whereas earth, water, fire, and air are in everything. And scent and taste do not pervade the form realm. If you're in the form realm, there is no scent or taste. So they're not considered all-encompassing. But of the last two, of space and consciousness, the last two all-encompassing sense spaces are in nature the pure virtue of the first two formless equipoises, infinite space and infinite consciousness. Their spheres, their own levels for aggregates only. They're only looking at their own, because unlike because they can only focus on the particulars of their own level, the formless can't focus on the desire. So unlike the formless emancipations described above, because here it is in terms of the focus on particulars, the learned ones have said. So the emancipations can focus on their on other aspects as well, and other things in the higher levels and so forth. But here it's only on the particulars of their own levels. So the last two formless are not set forth as all-encompassing sense bases, since they are unclear and thus incompatible with expanding or contracting. In other words, when you're doing this meditation, you imagine first something small is the earth, water, fire, air, space, or consciousness, or whatever. And then you imagine that it gets larger and larger and larger until it's encompassing the entire world. And so on the last two formless, they're unclear, so that it's nothingness. And on either conception or non-conception, so they're kind of a little hazy. They can't imagine something getting bigger. Or according to some, since they're the result of the all-encompassing. So actually they come from out of the all-encompassing sense bases. The reason that is said is because it's explained in a text called the Great Compendium. Because the all-encompassing infinite space and consciousness is infinitely and immeasurably accomplished, there is no enhancement of that. So the distinctions among the emancipations, overpowering sense bases, and all-encompassing sense bases is that their qualities gradually increase. So they're basically similar types of meditation, but they get stronger and stronger. Their qualities increase. So the first one, in the emancipations, you're directed away from the discards. You're moving away, you're turning away from the discards. Then, in the second one, the overpowering sense bases, the discards are overpowered. So this kind of comes out of the emancipations. Then that is made pervasive. It's not like they're just overpowered in some sort of small localized area, but over the entire universe, made pervasive. So the earlier are perfected and purified, and as they are perfected and purified, the latter arise. And they're each superior to the previous. So like the lesser, medium, and greater, or cause, both cause and result, or result only. So the sense base, the emancipations are like the lesser, the overpowering are medium, and the all-encompassing sense bases are the greater. Or you can think that the sense base of, or excuse me, the emancipations are the cause of the overpowering, so they're cause only. The overpowering sense bases are the result of the emancipations and the cause of the all-encompassing sense bases, so they're both cause and result. And the all-encompassing sense bases are just the result of the overpowering, but they do not cause of deeper or further absorption. So how they are attained. Cessation that has been explained. So the cessation was described in the second area. It's expressed through aroused. It is achieved through training by noble beings, by noble non-returners, also as we discussed in the sixth area. So the rest, the remaining 25, the 25 means you've got the emancipation of cessation as one, but if you have the eight the 8 emancipations, the 10 overpowering sense bases, and the 8 all-encompassing sense bases, that makes a total of 26. So 1 is taken out, so you have 25 left. That's the remaining 25. They are gained merely through detachment if you are familiar. That is, if you have meditated on them in the past, but you lost your meditation. You meditated them a lot and frequently. So then when you then gain detachment again, you automatically gain them, if they have arisen before, or if unfamiliar, by training and effort, because they arise from the power of habituation or non-habituation. So if you've already done them, you've been habituated to them. And if you haven't done them before, you have to make the habit, which means that you have to meditate. So the distinctions of support. This has 2 points. The actual, the formless, are supported by 3 realms, and the rest arise in humans. The 4 emancipations called formless, and 2 of the all-encompassing sense bases, are supported by 3 realms. They can be in the desire form and formless. The rest, that is the other 19, so you take the 6. The 6 mentioned there, plus the cessation, that gives you 19. They take that from the 26, that gives you 19. So they rise in humans. So they are only on the support of humans. This is because they must be produced by the power of Scripture, and the gods and other wanderers do not have the Scriptures. So you have to have someone teach them to you, in other words. And that doesn't happen. That only happens in the human realm. It does not happen in the form or the formless realms, especially not in the formless realm. The elaboration. In 2 realms, the power of cause and karma produces formless equipoise. So in the 2 realms, in the form and the formless realms, how do they arise? From the power of cause and the power of karma. As it says in the commentary, well then, since there are no scriptures there, that is in the higher realms, how do the absorptions of the dhyana and formless of the higher levels arise in the higher 2 realms, you ask? So the absorptions of dhyana and the formless are produced by the power of 4 things. The first is scripture, cause is the second, karma is the third, dharma nature is the fourth, the nature of things. Scripture we just talked about. And so cause, what does cause mean? In the higher 2 realms, there is no scripture, but the power of both cause and karma produces formless equipoise. So as it says here, production by power of cause is when previously on a human support, one has meditated on the samadhi of the peak existence and regressed from that. So in the human being, you develop the power of the peak of existence, you regress from it though. Now the peak of existence here is an example. It's one of the higher levels of form or formless. So you develop it, you do it actually a fair amount. You've practiced it, you got pretty good at it, but you still regressed. You regress from that one, but then you're born in one of the lower form levels of form or formless realm. So after being born either on one of the lower formless realms or the formless levels in the form realm, the previous cause of same status of previous meditation, the samadhi of peak, arises. In other words, that previous meditation that you've done kind of repeatedly and with a bit of diligence, that's still there, even if you'd kind of lost it. So therefore, when you were born in that other realm in form or formless, then it can become manifest as developing the samadhi. So in the Great Exposition tradition, they say that it's from a previous cause. In the Sutra tradition, they say it arises from imprints, because they talk about imprints in the Sutra tradition, the Sutra school tradition, but not in the Great Exposition. This is discussed a little bit of detail in the Yashometra and also in the Chim Abhidharma, the ornament of Abhidharma. So production by force of karma is also when in a previous human life one performs karma that will definitely ripen as birth in the peak and the future life. So it is pretty similar. So basically, when you when you do the meditations of the jhanas and the formless, they are karma, and they can have, if the conditions come together, they have the full ripening result of rebirth in the form or formless realms. So this means that you perform karma that's definitely going to ripen as birth and peak in a future life. You've done it, but you regress. So after you regress, you may be reborn in any one of the previous mentioned lower levels, but you have that karma that says you have to be reborn on the peak. So after regressing, one is born in one of the previously mentioned lower levels. And since one must definitely be reborn on the peak because you have that karma that must definitely ripen, at that point, the absorption of the peak will be attained. And this also has a causal aspect. So it's kind of related to cause, but it's a little bit different. It's the karma that's primary here. So it's explained to be called production by the power of karma. Now, the one that isn't mentioned here is the production by power of the dharma nature, by the nature of things. And what that means is that there is, as we discussed in the third chapter, which we discussed last summer, at the end of an eon, the beings are just naturally reborn into higher and higher levels as the realms of the universe are destroyed. And so that by reborn there, by the fact that the universe is being destroyed, being reborn in either the first, second, or third form is because of the nature of phenomena. Now, there's also some aspect of having meditated upon them in the past and then being reborn in them because the world is being destroyed. So then the next one is how samadhi arises. Those two, and also dharma nature, that is productions of powers of cause and karma, and also the power of dharma nature produce the dhyanas of the in the form realm. So the form realm, that dharma nature being reborn when the rest of the universe is being destroyed, is in the form realm only, not the formless realm. So now we have completed the main topic of the chapter, and so now we've come to the explanation of the branch that completes the composition, the actual summary of the treatise. So the conclusion of all 8 chapters. So this has 3 topics. The first is how long the teachings will remain. The second is how long, the summary of the treatise itself, and the manner of completing the explanation. So how long the teachings will remain, this is really saying, what are the teachings? What makes them stay? And how long will they be here? These are interesting questions, especially now that it's been, somewhere over 2,000 years since the Buddha appeared in the world. So how long is Buddhism going to stay? And since we are here and studying Buddhism, if we're going to study Buddhism, if we're going to practice Buddhism, what does it mean to uphold Buddhism? When we say that people uphold the Dharma, what do we mean by saying that they uphold the Dharma? And if we're going to understand what it means to uphold the Dharma, then we also need to understand what is the Dharma itself. So this is why first we have this says the teachings. What are the teachings? The text reads, the teacher's true Dharma is twofold, in essence, scripture and realization. So when we talk about the true Dharma of the Buddha, the teacher is the Buddha, we have 2 parts, the Dharma of scripture and the Dharma of realization. And so these are discussed in different ways in different texts, what it actually means for scripture and realization. So here, when we're talking about scripture, we are talking about the three baskets, the Tripitaka, the Vinaya, Sutras, and Abhidharma. And when we're talking about realization, what we're talking about are the 37 factors of enlightenment. So how long will this true Abhidharma that explains the aspects of dharmas, the defiled, undefiled, level, focus aspects, and so forth, remain? So here, Wangchuk Dorje is introducing this with a question about the Abhidharma in particular, but it's really talking about all of the Buddha's teachings. So what are the Buddha's teachings and how long will they remain? So the Buddha's true Dharma, the teaching of true Dharma is twofold. In essence, it is the 3 baskets of scripture and realization, the factors of enlightenment. So these are what we mean by scripture and realization. Now, in some other texts, in Mahayana texts, it is sometimes said that Scripture is not just the words on the page, but it's actually the way that the noble beings who have achieved realization of the truths express the truths that they've realized. That is what we mean by scripture in some other, in the Mahayana, in some explanations in the Mahayana tradition. The realization is the actual insight into the nature of the truths, the actual directly seeing the nature of either the Four Noble Truths or the two truths, in particular seeing the nature of the ultimate truth. So that's a Mahayana explanation. Here in this tradition, in this treatise, it's given more specifically the three baskets of Vinaya Sutra and Abhidharma, and then the realization, the factors of enlightenment. Actually, I said the 37 factors of enlightenment. It's probably not the 37 factors of enlightenment. It could well be the 7 factors of enlightenment, but this is not clear here. And I don't recall seeing it as clearly in other treatises, in the other sources either. So how long will they remain? Because now we know what the teachings are. How long are they going to be in this world? And that depends on how they're upheld. So who upholds the teachings? So these are upheld only by those who teach them and accomplish them. So these means the teachings of the Buddha, the teachings of scripture, and the teachings of realization. And the only ones who uphold them are the people who teach them and therefore uphold the traditions of the Dharma of scripture, and those who accomplish them, who actually achieve realization. Those are the ones who uphold the Dharma of realization. So this is a very important verse, and actually this whole stanza is one that is frequently quoted. In fact, Trungpa Rinpoche, when he quotes from the Abhidharma, there are 2 verses that he quotes more frequently than any other one. The first is the one from the 6th chapter where it says, with conduct, listening, and contemplation completely trained in meditation, giving an overview of the path. Then he also will quote this one about this: the teacher's true dharma is twofold, in essence, scripture and realization. These are upheld only by those who teach them and accomplish them. So these, and it's not just Trungpa Rinpoche, it's actually these are among the most commonly quoted verses in any work that I have read. Of course, there are other verses that are also frequently commented, but these 2 kind of stand out. So when you're talking about upholding the scripture, so what is it to uphold the scripture, the Dharma of scripture, you say? Because we have to uphold both scripture, Dharma of scripture, and the Dharma of realization. For the Dharma of scripture, what does upholding it mean? So according to the scriptures, that is the scriptures, are only upheld by those who, after coming to know them, teach them to others with an unafflicted intention. So this means that you have a Dharma teacher whose intention is not a worldly one of getting a name, who's not thinking about ticket proceeds, who's not thinking about fame, who's not thinking about building a reputation, but is really teaching them with an unafflicted intention. And that is someone who is upholding the scripture of Dharma. This is also called upholding the baskets, the 3 baskets or Pitaka of the Vinaya Sutra and Abhidharma, or it's also called upholding the scriptural Dharma and upholding the teachings. So this is how it is. So the practice of teaching is really important. It's actually a huge responsibility to teach the Dharma. When you're doing a class such as this one, and I look at myself and I see I probably haven't been doing very well at this, you have to make sure that you are saying things correctly, that you're not making mistakes, that you're not making things up, that you're not embellishing what is already enough. Of course, you have to sometimes bring things into the modern world. You wouldn't, and the things that they found delicious in 4th century India are different than what we find delicious now. So if you want a delicious example for now, you have to use something different, like chocolate oblivion truffle torte. But the meaning has to be the same. So you have to really be careful when you're teaching the Dharma. And this is not just when we're doing a formal class, but also when we're teaching to others. It's really important. It's very important to make sure that when you teach the Dharma, or when you explain the Dharma to a friend, that you're not making things up. You're teaching what is taught. and to try not to get it wrong, to make sure that you aren't mixing the words and the meanings and so forth. So you have to know the words, you have to know the meanings, you have to try to present them as clearly as you can. And this is the process of upholding the teachings. So, and of course, this is something that with enough study and thought and a careful attention to your motivations, I think any of us can do. If you keep studying the Abhidharma, keep studying the Dharma, then there'll be times when people are going to, you'll be in a conversation with someone and they'll say something, and you say, well, no, actually, or they say something, they say, what is this? What does this term refer to? We'll say, well, in the Abhidharma, it refers to this. I talk about Milarepa doing the meditation on the all-encompassing sense basis. What is this meditation? You can say, oh, well, this is what it is. It's in the Abhidharma. Here's what it says in the Abhidharma. Or so forth, when talking about what are the natures of the five aggregates. Because a lot of people use these terms, the five aggregates, but when you come right down to it and say, do you know what the five aggregates are? How can you teach what the five aggregates are if you don't actually know what the word means? So you have to know what these words are. And then when you can explain them to others. And in doing this is maybe on a small scale, but small is not insignificant. You have to take it seriously. You have to have a good intention, good motivation, and not be doing it to say, I've studied the Abhidharma. The aggregates means many things heaped together. That's what aggregate means. And you're thinking, you're just heaping more upon your own ego clinging. So it's important to check your motivation. And those who uphold realization accomplish them, the dharmas of the factors of enlightenment within their being, and practice them. So you're actually developing the qualities that come out of meditation. So here, the noble dharmas in particular. And so when we're talking about the Great Exposition tradition, of course, this is talking about the dharmas of realization that come out of the Great Exposition path. This would be the factors of enlightenment. So you develop them within your being and you practice them. That is upholding the Dharma. And so in the same way with, for example, if we are in the Mahamudra or Dzogchen traditions or whatever you're doing, or if you're doing Vajrayana or Mahayana practice or whatever practice you're doing, when you actually develop the qualities in your being, in other words, when you have the realization within your own being, you, in the Mahamudra or Dzogchen, you see the nature of your mind, or you realize the nature of a deity, or you develop not just an understanding, but a realization of emptiness. So that is the Dharma of realization. So these are the two ways that you can uphold the teaching, by either teaching them or by developing the qualities. As there are no upholders of the teachings or the true Dharma other than those two, the word only is said. So if you aren't really doing either, then you're not really upholding the teachings, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because you have to get to the point where you can uphold the teachings. We don't say of everyone who's practicing the Dharma that they're upholding the teachings. Of course, in some way, just by practicing the Dharma, you're supporting the teachings, but to really uphold the teachings, we're talking about teaching and realization. Now here, in another translation, it says that the word only applies only to the Dharma of realization, because that's the real Dharma. This is not the, Wangchuk Dorje, of course, interprets it differently, but also looking at the Aro commentary and the Yashomitra, it's pretty clear in both of those that the only means that it includes these two, both scripture and realization. The upholders of the scriptures are, it's quite likely that actually the other translator was following the teaching given in the commentary that he was translating. So I'm sure that he was doing that, and that the commentary he was following was saying that, but it's what do we say, a different position. The upholders of the scriptures are the supports for those who speak and accomplish. So in other words, by teaching, you help those who are teaching or speaking and teaching and practicing the Dharma. The unerring supports for the scriptures are those with accomplishment. So they're the ones who are the truly, because when you're just teaching as an ordinary being without realization, you don't have that level of certainty or all the qualities. So the unerring supports are those who have realization. Only those who have accomplishment are the upholders of realization, because without accomplishing it, one cannot teach the meaning that one has realized. So if you're going to teach someone else the Dharma of realization, you have to have realization yourself. Instead of doing it when you're just having temporary experiences, you actually have to have the realization if you're actually going to guide people to achieve realization, or if you're truly upholding the Dharma of realization. So therefore, the true Dharma will remain as long as there are beings who speak, that is, teach, and accomplish the Dharma. So as long as people are teaching and actually accomplishing, not just practicing, but accomplishing the Dharma. In particular, as far as the teachings of the teacher Shakyamuni, because as the Buddha himself predicted, the teachings would remain in this world for a limited amount of time. The Ada commentary explains they will remain for 1,000 years. And so this is taught at the time of in some of the scriptures of the Buddha. The Buddha said that teachings would remain for 1,000 years past his death. And so this is the position that the Ada commentary presents. But some say that this is in terms of realization. That the teachings of realization will last for 1,000 years, but the teachings of scripture will remain longer. As Swanchik Dorje says, some say this is in terms of realization, but that the scriptures will remain 1,000 years longer than that. So the teachings of realization will last for 1,000 years after the Buddha, then another 1,000 years of scripture. And this is also the explanation of the authors of the Tikas, of the various Indian commentaries. The prince, that is Yashomitra, explains, the teachers will remain for a long time means that they will remain for another 1,000 years. I view this position only as logical. Now, the reason why this is logical is if you think about it historically, Vasubandhu wrote his treatise in the 4th century, which was probably some 900 years, close to 1,000, a little over 900 years after the Buddha had achieved enlightenment. So they're coming to the end of that 1,000 years. Yashomitra obviously was later than Vasubandhu. So it had been 1,000 years. And the teachings were still there. They were still flourishing in India. There was a lot of activity in the teachings. They could see at that time that there were fewer arhats than there were told in the sutras about the time of the Buddha. So it would be reasonable to say that, well, of course, that would mean that there's less realization, but there's still the scriptures will remain for a long time. And then the good Eon, this is a sutra, says, the true Dharma of the thus gone, or the Bhagavan, or the Tathagata Shakyamuni will remain for 1,000 years. For another 500 years, a pseudo-true Dharma. There will be a pseudo-true Dharma. In other words, it's not quite the true Dharma, but it'll be there. So after the Buddha passes away, there'll be 1,000 years where there's Dharma. And then after that, it's kind of like pseudo, or ersatz is the word that Ian Cochrane used in his translation. So not quite. It looks like it, but it's not. The minor topics, which is a Vinaya text, say that the Dharma will remain for 1,000 years. The sutra requested by Chandragarbha explains that it will remain for 2,000 years and be destroyed by the strife of the Kaushambir. So the Kaushambi is an area in India. Master Kamalashila says in his commentary on the Vajrakutter Sutra, it is renowned among the learned that the teachings will last 5 times 500 years, which is 2,500 years. So these are just presenting different positions on how long the teachings will remain. In the commentary on the 100,000, that is the Prajnaparamita Sutra and 100,000 sutras, it is said that by dividing 5,000 into sections, there are 10 periods of 500 years. So in the first of these sections, there will be many arhats. In the second, many non-returners, and in the third, many stream enterers. So that these are the 3 chapters of the period of results. There are 3 sections of 500 years each. In the fourth period, there will be many who abide by the trainings of prajna, many by the trainings of mind, and in the sixth, many who abide by the trainings of discipline. So these are the 3 chapters of the period of accomplishment. So this is the 3 trainings in mind, the superior training in discipline, superior training in samadhi, and superior training in prajna. So those 3 each have 500 years each. In the 7th, there will be many who uphold the Abhidharma. In the 8th, those who uphold the basket of sutras, and in the 9th, those who uphold the Dharma. So these are the 3 chapters of the period of scripture. So again, dividing 500 years for each. And then the 10th, the last period, is called the chapter of those who hold merely the signs, and it is also labeled the last 500. So the last 500 years, holding merely the signs means they're just going to wear robes, nothing else. They'll wear robes, but nothing else. They won't observe any other, anything else. They won't have any qualities. After that, the true Dharma will disappear. And then it'll be gone until the time of the Buddha Maitreya. At that time, the lifespan of Buddhas in the Rose Apple land, that is Jambudvipa, the central continent, or the southern continent, will be 50 years. So now the lifetime is 60 years, and it is the period of Abhidharma, it says. So they're saying at the time that that text was written, it was the period of the Abhidharma. So, well, actually, what time is it? So Wangchuk Dorje then gives us some calculations. So according to the calculations in the glorious Wangchuk Dorje is a clarification of the 4 times of the omniscient Lord, the duration of the teachings will remain is set strictly 5,000 years. Exactly 5,000 years, strictly 5,000 years. So there are these 10 periods of 500 years each. So in these, so calculating from this, the fire rat year of 1576. So in the completed year of the female wood pig, that was the previous years before the year that he was writing this, 952 years had passed since the completion of the 3 500-year periods of results. Another 2,548 are thought to remain. So this means that Wangchuk Dorje is calculating this, and we get to do a little bit, since this is Abhidharma, we have to deal with numbers, right? Abhidharma is renowned for talking about numbers, so we have to do a little addition on this class. So 952 years after the end of the 500-year period. So that would mean like 2,452 years since the Buddha had passed away. Okay. Another 2,548 are thought to remain, which would mean that you're in the 6th period of trainings of discipline, or almost in the trainings of discipline according to that calculation. So then the question is, well, what does that mean now? Well, basically, he's saying that the Buddha passed away in 877 BC, because if you subtract 2,452 from 1576, you get 877, negative 877, or 877 BC. So that's when he's saying the Buddha passed away, and then the teachings remain. Puts it in the 600 years. So for us, that would be 2,898 years ago. So this is saying that the Buddha passed away in 877, so the Buddha would have achieved enlightenment 45 years earlier than that, which would have been, what? 922, isn't it? 922 BC. So these calculations are actually given in a text were calculated by Pausula Trengwa, who was a student of the 8th Karmapa. And I think he also had some connection with the 9th Karmapa. He wasn't one of his main teachers, but there was some connection. And so he gave that year of 922 as the year that the Buddha passed away. Or that's the Buddha that the Buddha achieved enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, and therefore is the year that he passed away at the age of 81 would have been 45 years later, or 877, which is the date that Wangchuk Dorje is giving here. There are a whole lot of different calculations as to when the Buddha actually lived and when the actual Buddha passed away. And if you look at the Tibetan sources, they range from somewhere around 2000 BC to sometime in the 7th, 8th centuries BC. I think maybe a few in the 6th century BC. The Theravada tradition generally lists the Buddha's enlightenment as being in the 6th century BC. I think around 580, maybe 582 I think 582 BC is the year that they list that they give for the Buddha passing away. The reason that they do this is that the whole problem is that in India there was no dating system, no universal dating system, and people didn't seem to really think of dates as important as they did either in the West or in Chinese culture, for example, where it's very easy or comparatively easy to date people. Of course, it's not always so easy. There are always problems, but you can basically figure it out. And in India, it's like really hard to know, when is this person actually there? And many of the dates of people in India from the time of Vasubandhu have to be calculated based on the writings of the Chinese translators who went to India. Otherwise, we'd have no idea, when are they? Because they would go to India and they say, oh, I went to Nalanda University, and it was this master had died, and I studied with this master, and then they kind of figure out from that, okay, well, then that master must have been passed away before the period that this translator went. That's the only way we can really date people in the first half of the first millennium. When it gets back to the time of the Buddha, it's really hard to do, and the sources are not very clear. Except there are the Theravada sources what do we say? The Theravada sources that calculate based upon the number of years that each of the different elders oversaw the teachings. So after the Buddha passed away, there was Mahakashyapa, and he was the elder who oversaw the teachings for this period of time, and then Ananda and Rahula and so forth. And they list for each of them up through the time of the various councils and so forth. And then they get to the time of Ashoka, which can be dated because of the archaeological and so forth and other historical documents. That can be dated to the 3rd century BC. And so they come up with the time of 582. These days, many, for the enlightenment of the Buddha, these days many Western scholars say it can't have been that early. They look at, first of all, they don't trust the source of the Theravada sources because it says that like Rahula, who was already probably in his 50s or 60s when he became the, probably even older when he became the, he would have been in his 50s or maybe 60s when he became the elder. He was the elder for like over 100 years. Or was it one of the elders was for like over 100 years. So what Western academic is going to believe this? They aren't. It can't be true. You got to do your research and prove that it's not true. But they don't believe this. They take other things into account. And most Western academics, or a common position is that the Buddha was in the 3rd or 4th century BC. But I think that the Theravada position is probably actually much closer. And the reason is there's a Geshe. He's quite a character, Geshe Rinchen Ngudru. And he got very interested in this issue and very interested in astrology. And he took the traditional calculations of astrology, such as from the Kala Chakra and so forth, and he also combined them with the information you can get on things like the NASA websites and so forth. So if you want to know when did the Buddha achieve enlightenment, well, you can look at the astrological signs. We know that the Buddha was born on the full moon of the Vesak month, and that the sun was in some constant, I don't remember all the details. He had 7 different signs that were taught in the sutras, including that there was an eclipse. And he then went to the NASA website and looked up, when would there have been a total lunar eclipse in the month of May or June in Bodh Gaya? And it was 583 BC, 1 year different from the Theravada tradition. So I think that's a pretty good sign. There are also, which planet was in which constellation. The Tantras lists which planets were in which constellations, so the positions of planets. And so putting those all together, they all converged. The eclipse, the full moon, the position of Jupiter and Saturn and everything, it all converged on the year of 583, the full moon in the May of 583 for the Buddha to achieve enlightenment. So that's Geshe Rinchen Ngudru's position. So it's also very close to the that. So if you think about it from that position, so then the Buddha would have passed away 45 years later, and because it's BC, that would have been what, 528 BC. And then so another, so we're basically what, 528. Then we're at 2021. Well, we're almost. I don't want to do the math. We're quite a bit in. We're in like the sixth. Basically, we're in the sixth period of 500 years. Is the whichever, whether you calculate it by by Rangjung Dorje or Wangchuk Dorje's calculations, or by the calculations of the Theravada or Geshe Rinchen Ngudrip, we're in the sixth of the 500-year periods. And so that means that basically that we have another 400 or 500, whatever remains in this period, whether you say it's like 300 or 400 years, according to the Theravada and Geshe Rinchen Ngudrip, or maybe just 100 years left in this period. But you have what's ever left in this period plus another 4 periods. So that's somewhere over 2,400 years left for the Dharma to remain. So if the Dharma is going to remain for another 2,400 years at this point, or 2,100, I guess if Wangchuk Dorje in 1576 thought that it was 2,548, so he'd be thinking that we're closer to 2,000 years left. So if it's going to last, whether it's 2,000 or 2,500 years, the only way that it's going to last that time is for people such as ourselves to develop the ability to uphold it through either scripture or realization, through either teaching or through realization. We have this great benefit of receiving the teachings of the Buddha. It's been passed down to us for 2,500, so what, long time, 2,700, 800 years. So we have this opportunity to practice the Buddha now because of the kindness of everyone who has upheld the teachings through realization or through scripture. And if it's going to last for over 2,000 more years and benefit sentient beings, even if in a somewhat diminished form, that means that we have to uphold the teachings now. Because if we don't uphold the teachings and we let them go, then there won't be any teachings for the future generations. So this is why we have to be diligent in our study and our practice. It's kind of like when you think about it, why did the teachings remain for this long? It's not just that people thought there's benefit for me in practicing the Buddhism. There's benefit for me, it's going to make my life better, reduce stress and all that, or even think I'm going to achieve enlightenment and so forth, I'm going to pass to nirvana. If people had only thought about that, the teachings wouldn't be here. Even the great arhats at the time of Buddha, for example, Mahakashyapa, who convened the first council that really was critically important. Without that first council, the Buddhist teachings would have been lost. But he convened it. They held the first council and did the scriptures. Everyone there was an arhat. And as an arhat, we always talk about them in the Tibetan tradition. We say, well, they have no thought of others. They're only focused on their own benefit. It's not entirely true. They were thinking about the teachings and benefiting the teachings into the future without their pure intention of preserving the teachings of the Buddha. Not for themselves, because they'd already achieved arhatship, but for the people who needed to be taught, the people who needed to develop realization. They held the council, they compiled the scriptures, and because of that, we have the teachings of the Buddha. Later on, we had people who, other beings who did this. Now, of course, you'd kind of expect it for someone who calls themselves a Mahayana teacher or Mahayana practitioner. And people always, I think, when you really take it seriously, then you're going to do your best. But really, it comes down to people such as ourselves who are ordinary beings who want to do something to benefit ourselves and others. And realizing that this only comes from, the true benefit only comes from the Dharma. So you take this to heart and devote yourself to practice. Now, we all have different positions in this lifetime. We all have different things that we come in with, different skills and so forth, and abilities and so forth. Even if we do not actually make the, if we don't make the grade, if we don't actually develop the ability in ourselves to teach the Dharma or to uphold the Dharma of realization, even if we don't do that, at least if we make the aspiration in the future, may I continue to develop qualities so that I can uphold the Dharma, may I become an upholder of the Dharma, then this itself, because that aspiration, when you make an aspiration, you're making the conditions for it to happen. So that aspiration will come true in some way. And by doing that, we ourselves can also then later become like all these great beings, the Mahakashyapas, the Anandas, the Rahulas, the Chotapantaka, who I mentioned the other day. I mean, if Chotapantaka could uphold the teachings of realization, we can too, right? So we have to keep that in mind. We can't just, we can't expect that it's going to be someone else who's going to be upholding the teachings of realization. If someone's going to do it, well, that someone is us. It's up to us to really devote ourselves to teaching, to learning the teachings, to studying them, and then learning how to teach them and upholding the scripture of realization. It is up to us to do our practice, to follow the instructions we're given by our gurus, by lamas, by teachers and spiritual friends, and develop the qualities that are taught in whatever path that we're doing. Because by doing that, then we will be able to teach them to the next generation. So it's up to us whether the teachings are going to remain for another 2,000 years. It's also up to us in terms of making sure that our world remains for another 2,000 years. And if we continue to go on the world as it is with climate change and so forth, even if human beings are around for another 2,000 years, we're not going to be able to have the same lifestyle. It'll be a very, very different situation. So we have to be careful about taking care of the world. But we especially have to think about taking care of our preserving the teachings. When the Gyalwang Karmapa has spoken a lot about environmental protection, and it's not just for the sake of preventing temporary suffering now, but it's also because this world realm that we are in now is the pure realm of the Buddha Shakyamuni. And it's really important that it's pure, because this pure realm of the Buddha Shakyamuni is where the teachings of the Buddha Shakyamuni are preserved. So if we're going to preserve those teachings that bring benefit to so many beings, not only beings in this world realm, because people can realize them, gain realization in this world realm and then go teach in other world realms too. But if we're going to preserve these teachings and use them to benefit all other beings, we have to develop these qualities of being able to uphold the teachings of scripture and realization. So no matter where we are, I mean, what we're doing, and of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go off and, what do we say, become some sort of famous Dharma teacher or do anything like that. You know, there might not be any external change in your life. What's important is to change your mind, to develop the wish to do this, and then do what you can to achieve it. And this is really important, not just for ourselves. Of course, it's of great benefit for ourselves, but there's so many beings who don't have any protector. They're lost, getting burned in forest fires, losing everything in forest fires. Some of them, you lose everything in the forest fire or get forced out of your vacation on a forest fire, and you still don't really realize what's going on. We say all of these forest fires and so forth are exacerbated by climate change, and still we're not changing anything. And we look at all the floods that are happening last week a few weeks ago in Nepal, last week in Europe, and currently in China. And this is also climate change and so forth. So we have to think about what we're doing and remember the reasons for doing this. Of course, protecting people from suffering in any other way that we can do it is just absolutely critical, no matter what we do, no matter how we're going to do it. But if we also have to remember that this world realm is different than how many world realms are like this? How many world realms are there the teachings of the Buddha? So we have to keep that in mind and try to develop our own qualities so that we can uphold the teachings of the Shakyamuni Buddha and eventually become Buddhas ourselves to truly bring benefit to other sentient beings. So I see that there is a question. Okay. The question is, could you please comment on the non-composite space, which is also the object of the sense space of infinite consciousness, or infinite space, actually? And is there a relationship to this and resting in the nature of mind? So space, actually, by its nature, is non-composite. When you talk about space, you're just basically saying non-composite. But what this is saying in general is that it's not defined as like the general space that all phenomena are able to occur in. So that's what we mean by non-composite space. So this is the focus of the level of infinite space, particularly the preparations for infinite space. And this is different than resting in the nature of the mind, because resting in the nature of the mind means that you have, what do we say? Because resting in the nature of the mind is in the full awareness of the clear and luminous empty nature of the mind. But that is not present on the levels of the formless meditation, because that's a very, very deep level of samadhi, so shamatha meditation. So there's very little insight there. On the other hand, when we talk about the experiences of, or the nature of the mind, there are very few things that are actually decent analogies for the nature of mind. And the only thing that comes close is space. So it's frequently referred to in teachings on Mahamudra and Dzogchen as saying that the nature of the mind is like space. Well, the nature of the mind is similar to space. It's not the same, it's similar. And so this is a distinction that often teachers talk about. But generally, when you say, if you point at space, what are you going to point at? You can't point at it. If you look for space, where are you going to find it? There's nothing that you can actually find. As Tilopa says, looking in the center of space, seeing stops. You just can't. You're looking in the middle of space. There's nothing there to see. It's just space. So that's so it's used as an analogy for the meditations on resting in the nature of the mind, but it's not the same. So that the infinite space is very different. And so then another question is, could you say more about the age we are in, discipline, and why it is called this? The reason it is called this is because in the previous ages, the first you had the 300 years, the three 500-year periods of 500 years with a lot of arhats, 500 years with a lot of non-returners, and then 500 years with a lot of stream enters. And then for each of the three trainings, there's 500 years where the teachings where the training in prajna was predominant, then 500 years where the teachings on the training in samadhi, or training in mind, is predominant. So now we're said to be in a period where the trainings in discipline are important. So this means that the main focus of people in this 500-year period is said to be primarily focus on practicing discipline. So this would be the pratimoksha discipline, the bodhisattva discipline, and so forth. So the 500 years. So it's because discipline is like the lowest of it's like the basis for the other two trainings. They're considered higher. What we really need is prajna, but we can't have that without samadhi, and samadhi requires discipline. So now this is an age where people's capacity is such that we primarily practice discipline. And so that's why it's called the age of discipline. Oh, and one more question. Within the 10 all-encompassing sense spaces, why are these specific colors and not green here? It's because of being a mixture of blue and yellow. This is a good question. It probably has something to do with being the primary colors of white, red, yellow, and blue. So those 5 are the primary colors. The secondary colors are different. So it's meditating on the primary colors. So essentially, it's green being a mixture of blue and yellow. Okay, so I think that is enough for today. And tomorrow will be our last day. We went on a little bit longer today. I hope you forgive me for blabbing along so much, but we did. So tomorrow we have only a little bit of the text left, the actual summary, the advice to be careful. So we will now please dedicate the merit of teaching and listening to the Dharma to the benefit of all sentient beings, so that the teachings of the Buddha may long remain, and so that all sentient beings may contact them, and so that and progress along the path and achieve Buddhahood. And if all sentient beings are going to contact them, that means that there need to be people who uphold them. So please also dedicate this so that we and all other sentient beings who contact the teachings of the Buddha are able to uphold the teachings of the Buddha. And also let's dedicate this so that all of the sufferings that afflict this world and any other world realm, such as the sufferings of flood and fire, conflict, famine, and so forth, all be pacified once and for all. And thinking in this way, let us recite these dedication prayers. O chanchu samcho rinpoche ma ke panam ke jur chi je pa nyamba me paryam konne gondo pelvar sho. Oh, that's the wrong one. I'm sorry. I went too far. Oh, where did I go? One moment. Let's try that again. I have to get this back. Here we are. Sunam di tamje sikpani tobne nyebe ranam pamchete geganachi balong trupayi si petsole drokun yodrosho. By this merit may we attain omniscience, defeat the enemy, wrongdoing and free all beings swiftly from the ocean of existence, churned by great waves of birth, age, sickness, and death. May bodhicitta, great and precious, arise in those who have not roused it, never weakening in those who have. May it grow ever stronger and stronger. Oh, where did it go? Back here. Where am I? Trying to find how to stop the screen share. Oh, sometimes things are too difficult. There we are.
Thank you, Temple. Thank you.
Thank you.